Well, I, my last year of high school, with the exception of how it ended with my father passing away, it was a very happy year of my life. We went to a dormitory in Medicine Hat that was set up for rural students, and there were 50 of us. On one side of the dormitory was the 25 girls, bedrooms and so on. And on the other side was the 25 boys. Went from grade 10 to grade 12. And in between, there was the living room where we ate, and the kitchen where we put food together, and where we studied. And it was set up in a way you were pretty well forced to get to know girls and so on. You'd be washing dishes with them, or you'd be sweeping floor with them, or studying with them, and so on. In my last year of grade 12, I actually didn't have my French. I was taking 4 courses in the morning. I was taking chemistry 12, and math 12, and English 12, and French 10. And so anyway, I would take classes in the morning, and then I worked at a cowboy clothing store in the afternoon, unpacking things and so on. I wasn't a good salesperson, but I managed to get a little money in that way. But we got to know each other so well, and it was like a great big family. I was the local tough in
Were you?
There was of the 25 of us in there. There was a guy from rural area as well, Manyberries, who the superintendent would never let us fight. I figured I could pound the hell out of it, but I had worked in the summers on ranches and so on. I was just physically a piece of iron, I could just, and so there were times when my friends, there was once when 3 of my friends tried to put me into the shower. I was the only one, I don't think, that ever was put in the shower. They didn't succeed. I tried for a half an hour or something.
Pull you in.
And then there was there was a part of the school that had students sort of on the second level, in metal work and things like that. Well, there was a guy, oh God, John, what was John's last name? Anyway, he was a local tough in that area. And there was one day he came to the school, or came to our residence over noon hour, and we got in a fight. I got in a fight with him. I sat on him for an hour, unable to get up, and eventually we fought for a full bloody hour, and it didn't have lunch that day. But yeah, John, he was a big fellow. I was about 175, 180 pounds maybe then. John was 220 at least. He was a big guy. Anyway, so that was that instance. So I had a reputation in that respect.
Yeah, I never would have pictured
I never
you like
thought
that.
of myself as a bully or so on. There was the odd person that when they didn't do their job, I led them to the shower,
So what do you mean when you say you're bringing people to the shower?
What's
happening there?
They gave them a shower with their clothes on.
Right. I see what you're saying.
And, people that did things that just shouldn't be done.
So do you think you had something to prove?
I'm sorry?
Do you think you had something to prove with all this fighting and so on? Like, I never would have pictured you that way.
It wasn't a lot of fighting. And I had a good relationship with the guys. But in a school of young men, that sort of thing goes on. I roomed with a fellow who was very political. He and I, we agreed on an awful lot of things. He went into diplomatic service, and actually knew Diefenbaker, Prime Minister.
Oh.
Diefenbaker cut short his career to some extent because Dave McCracken was his name. He was an extraordinary political talent in the school. He had been president of the school, and the year that that I was there, he ended up the valedictorian and so on. I kept somewhat in contact with him for years after. He eventually had a stroke and passed away 20, 30 years ago now, I guess. But he had been a sort of minor individual in control of Middle East affairs.
Oh, for Canada?
For Canada. So that was an interesting connection. Other than that, I can just say it was such a good year because it was a very social year. I had never been in so close contact with young people my age, and you know, under it really was like a big family. Towards the end of the year, of course, things turned a bit. In April, I had to come home for 2 weeks to farm, because my brother Gordon, and who was in his mid-20s at that time, had mumps, can't do anything. And my little brother Dick had mumps as well. But so I did most of putting the crop in April, and then I went back, and I guess it was, I'm going to look at my genealogy, but yeah, it was May the 21st, I think. Friday, May the 21st. I, about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I was getting ready to go to the university, what do you call it, the big celebration.
Graduation?
Graduation celebration. And someone found out my dad had died, and they weren't going to tell me.
Right.
Well, someone did, and so that was the end of that event for me. I came home, and we buried my dad in Medicine Hat and so on. Things started in the family falling apart then. My mother, I think, already had cancer. I didn't know it, but she must have already had fairly advanced cancer. And so after my dad died, I think in June or thereabouts, my mother was pretty well and totally in bed at home. I wasn't home, I was still at school, but in a way I finished high school in Medicine Hat, and at that point I applied to go into the military. That's the only way I could have financed my university. So I and a couple others at least went together and went to Edmonton and took the initial training and so on.
Right. Well, before we get into that, maybe we could just quickly. I'm curious what it was like in your family at the time when both your parents.
I'm sorry.
I'm curious how it was like in your family at the time. Both your parents passed away within a few months.
Well, I mean that had hit me hard, but I didn't know it. I was somewhat unaware of the impact it had on me. First of all, of course, I was away from home, and so I didn't see an impact on the farm. And but I'd like actually to go through that a bit. My mother's still alive, you see.
Right.
I don't know how far I proceeded the other day with it. Anyway, I had to complete my French.
Mm-hmm.
I basically had no French. And if I was going to be accepted in the military,
Mm-hmm.
I had to have French 12.
Right.
Lucky there was a school in Red Deer
Mm-hmm.
that offered summer school, offered the 3-year French program in a little over a month.
Okay. Right, so you hadn't even started yet.
Yeah. And so I went there. Marvelous teacher. My 3 years of French, really, I learned 99% of it in 1 month.
Mm-hmm.
I went there for the month, and I was at that point I was a dedicated student. I was working till 2, 3 in the morning and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And lucky for me, I'd been an average French student, even in these pitifully low-level French examples
yeah.
I'd been involved with. But in those days, all you had to do was read and write. You
Right.
didn't have to speak French. And so I went there that month, came back home in early August, and 2 weeks later, I had to write the French departmental exam.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that I got in my mother's car, and my sister Violet and I drove to Medicine Hat for me to write this exam, and we got about halfway to Medicine Hat, and I'm driving too fast, and the road turns out, you just, last minute, I see half the road is washed out.
Oh yeah.
And
Flood.
it's gravel. And when you're driving and you suddenly have to do this kind of thing
Mm-hmm.
on gravel,
Like a swerve.
well, you just go like that. And I still don't know to this day how I got out of it. But I would see that ditch, then I saw that ditch, then I saw that ditch, and gradually I stabilized it.
Huh.
Anyway, we didn't kill ourselves. Went in and I wrote the exam, and I got 83%.
So you made it.
My French 10 teacher in Medicine Hat couldn't imagine how the hell I ever got that. So I had then had my graduation,
Mm-hmm.
and I at that point I'm back on the farm helping Gordon and so on. My mother is in bed most of the time, pretty well all the time, and so it wasn't an uptime in the family.
Mm-hmm.
Then my mother goes into the hospital. I may have the dates out here a little way. It's got to be somewhere in August. When I finally have to go to university,
Mm-hmm.
and went to Medicine Hat with Gordon, and my mother is in the hospital and looking extremely good. She seems to be high energy, And to this day, I'm convinced that she thought she was cured. And so I went in and I had a very pleasant visit with my mother and Gordon and I. Then we walked out with the doctor, and the doctor said she's got 2 months. 2 months.
Yeah.
From looking, just perfectly normal. Well, I went to university, came back 2 months later, and my mother is just unrecognizable. In the 2 months, cancer has just totally eaten her up. And those are scenes from the family. Hard to take. I recall seeing my younger siblings go in for the last visit. See my mother. Well, I'm 19 years old at this point. Sort of feel I'm immune from, I realize I'm independent at this point. But I'm obviously not accepting the full impact. It's just been a transformation. And over the years, you never really realize it. But it's like someone has kicked your foundation out from under you. My first 2 universities went well, and I credit them primarily to being in engineering. In engineering, once you gain, you're like a family. There were about 60 of us engineers in Edmonton that went from class to class to class.
Yeah.
And then we'd go for coffee and it was a relatively happy time for me. Oh, I was working like a dog.
Sure you were. Yeah.
Because my past history and education had been pitiful. And I did well in first year engineering, and same in the second year. During this summer, I would go east. The first summer after completing my first year of university, we went to Kingston for basic training.
Right.
We're in the Air Force, of course. And so we had heavy training for some 6 weeks in Kingston. And then we went to Winnipeg. And I wasn't going to be a pilot. My eyes weren't good enough. Even then I found out I had some color blindness from the point of view of being a pilot. And so I was laid out for navigation. Spent my summer in navigation flying over northern Winnipeg, northern Manitoba, down into the States and so on. And we do these interesting control tests. We're pretending we're a navigator. And we're sitting in the classroom. And my God, that summer it was 100 above in Winnipeg. But you had to sit with your full uniform on. You had to have a tie and button-up shirt and a tunic over top of that. And for 3 hours, you would go through this test and they'd give you a piece of paper. You know, we're flying over Winnipeg and it's 2:02 a.m. or, you know,
whatever, yeah.
And the wind is 45 degrees from the west or at 30 miles an hour or whatever. And so, and we've got this flight path we're supposed to follow. Mm-hmm. So I've got to, in the 3 minutes, I've got to set a new heading for the plane and speed for the plane. Mm-hmm. So how far I'm off track, I've got to get on track. We even do star shots. We had these, I can't even think of what their name is now. That was when it happened at night. We'd be given these star shot information.
Right, you get a little, like a map of,
you'd get information. We actually used them at times. Mm-hmm. And then we do what was called dead reckoning. Right. Dead reckoning is looking down on the bloody ground and saying, where really am I?
Right.
You know, my data says I'm here, but am I really here? And so on. Anyway, so that's navigation the first year.
So are you doing this at the same time as university? Like back
No, university is over for the year.
Like within the same year though, you're kind of going back and forth, is it?
No, it's during the winter you're at university, mm-hmm. During summer you're in Winnipeg.
Right. And so was the arrangement that they'd expect you to stay on with the military afterwards once you got
the arrangement when I signed up was that I was to take 4 years university and do the various things in the summer in the military. And then I was to serve 3 years in the military. And then I would be free to go and do the rest, whatever I wanted to do in my life. Mm-hmm. Well, towards the end of the second year, mm-hmm. I and a few friends decided we didn't want to be in navigation, and nor did we want to be in. I wanted to be in telecommunications. Mm-hmm. And they wouldn't allow me to change my program in the summer. And I wanted to switch out of engineering mm-hmm. into pure math and science. Mm-hmm. And they wouldn't let me do that. Mm-hmm. And so we had a plan, and it was a totally generous plan. They said, okay, what you've got to do is serve a year in the military. In other words, you couldn't go to university that year. Mm-hmm. So after the summer of '56, they then sent me to a military base in Alberta, Penhold, Alberta. Mm-hmm. It was a flight training military base. And I was to be the assistant construction engineering person. Mm-hmm. So I spent my time in a drafting room, drafting whatever construction plans. And that I had to do for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And they paid me my full wage.
Mm-hmm.
And it was my time that was paying off my debt.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean,
It's a good deal then, yeah.
how could you complain about a deal like that?
Mm-hmm.
So I went to Penhold and spent a year there. I was just a cadet. I was the lowest possible rank of an officer you could imagine.
Mm-hmm.
But I got to stay in the officer's residence,
Mm-hmm.
had my own private room in the officer's residence.
Yeah, I suppose.
I ate in the officer's mess. I went in there and I'd play music or whatever on a Saturday and so on.
So any of these more like skilled trades and so on in the military, they count as officers, I suppose?
Oh, in the military, there's the officers and the non-officers. And it's a ludicrous situation in many respects. Mm-hmm. In my situation, there's the construction engineering officer. He's my boss.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's me. And then there's what is called warrant officer first class. Mm-hmm. He's probably a guy 60 years old who spent his life in the military.
Mm-hmm.
He knows 100 times more than me or this construction engineering officer, mm-hmm. which, but he's listening to us. Well, I don't say much because I know goddamn well what I know about this. You can put in there, and so I spent the year there. Warrant officer Sabina. No, he was a sergeant. Anyway, we would be constructing runways and things like that, mm-hmm. on the base, and doing whatever repair had to be done. But yeah, it was just so painfully obvious to me. This guy with a stripe on his shoulder, mm-hmm. Who'd been in the military maybe a couple of years longer than me. He's bossing around these warrant officer who has been in for 50 years. Yeah. Just made no sense. You know, I was so aware, from my understanding of, you should be in a position consistent with what you know and what you're able to do and so on. Mm-hmm. Well, that isn't the way the military is set up, because you start out with these two individual groups. They would try to do everything they could to boost our sense of who we were and how important we were and so on. I went on a train across Canada twice, and sitting in a room, I had a chair very much like this.
Yeah.
Luxurious. Watching people bring me drinks and just a young punk. But that, that's a strategy. You got to train this guy so he thinks he knows more than he really does. And anyway, so I get through that year. It's interesting. Another fellow ended up in Penhold in the exact same situation as me. Mm-hmm. Well, we had spent hours debating with the security a non-commissioned officer on the base. He and his sergeant. We'd go there at times when we weren't doing anything, and we'd debate, military rules and things like that. And I and this other guy, were taking sort of the ethical point of view. You punish people if they do things wrong and so on, but you got to have a good legal system. And we'd spend hours with them, and we got to know them very well. He's the top military policeman on the base. Well, guess what? At the end of the year, when I and my friend are finishing up, my friend, I couldn't imagine he did it. He apparently took all 4 tires off of someone else's vehicle, switched them, and drove east. Stole the 4 tires. I found that out later. And so the next thing I know, the RCMP are coming down to the farm in southern Alberta and searching for me. I'm gone to UBC by that time, you see. And so, anyway, they'd sent someone to the farm 2 or 3 times. And Gordon, I don't know if, I would have thought Gordon knew my address, but he didn't give it anyway. And so eventually I found, Gordon told me, these RCMP are coming around. They're looking for you. They say you stole a blanket when you left.
A blanket?
For Christ's sake. Stole a blanket. And so I get the information, and I write a long letter to the guy on the base, the top military fellow. And, in a sort of levels of sarcasm, point out, no, I did not steal a blanket of yours, and I don't know why you're going to the farm. Here's my address. Come down and see me here, and we can talk it out and so on. And then at the end of my letter, I remember I said, by the way, when I left, I forgot my iron. Would you please send it to me? Never heard a word from them. That was the end of it. So I could see it in his head. He said, these guys, they're talking a lot of puffy, legal,
like theory
and so on. But they're a couple of thieves. Anyway, that was the end of my experience in the military. And so I went back to, I finished, my debt got paid off almost exactly, maybe 2 weeks before I had to be back at university. So came down to UBC. Then I had a little car, an 830 Austin, that I drove. So that was the military end of that, and now I'm coming down to 3rd year university.
Yeah, I don't think you would have done well in the military. I mean, maybe you would have. Like, I just feel like you're too, like you said earlier, you could kind of see through the whole charade of the thing, right?
It just wasn't my thing. mean, there are very, many, many good things about it. They treated me very well overall, and but I'm not a military person. I don't believe you should be saluting stripes on shoulders. I think it's something to do with stripes on character that you should be saluting. And so that's the way the military. Yeah, and the other thing you saw in the military, the number. You know, I could go in and I could have $100 bill on whiskey a month or whatever. Just, you know, tab. Well, I didn't drink a lot, but there would be pilots that would be half cut when they were flying and so on.
Right.
Some of their lives weren't the happiest with them, I don't think. The one thing I didn't mention, maybe, I was the person who drew up plans and so on. And one day, you know, the top man, the commanding officer on the base, asked me to draw up a plan for an extension of the officers' mess that he wanted, and gave me the details and so on. So I drew up that plan, and and then they had a vote on it. As it turned out, they didn't accept the plan. But one day I was walking without my hat on. You're not supposed to be walking without your hat on, you know, as an officer. Anyway, I get stopped by the commanding officer, and look, I don't know. He congratulates me on my plan. He said it was a very good plan, and despite the fact that it didn't get passed. But that was my experience in the military.
Yeah. So then you went to university again.
Went to university at UBC.
So did you always know you were into math and science and so on?
Well, at that point, yeah, that's what I was going to do. Yeah. And the other thing, I'm not an engineering person as such. I have so many interests in other directions. So when I came to UBC, of all things, I took Russian. I took I took philosophy. I took I took economics, and so I took a cross section of subjects. But there my life somewhat started falling apart. And I could see it in retrospect, not having the constant connections that I'd had in the past. And, you know, living alone, going to university class with 300 people you hardly speak to. And although I was doing some of the things I wanted to do, my past life was starting to creep in.
Right.
That was my experience in my third year. half of that year I spent in a house in Shaughnessy. Now, you've heard of Shaughnessy in Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.
It's a upper class
Yeah.
area of Vancouver. And how this Norwegian woman managed to buy out a place and get rental approval. So there were 15 of us, as I recall. There were 7 Indonesians on a town planning program, and 7 other people like myself and me. So there were 15 people renting out in that. You know, she had 15 students.
Mm-hmm.
That's how she could afford it.
Right.
So I spent about 6 months there, and then the last 6 months I spent in another rental and closer to the university.
Mm-hmm.
But that was my 3rd year.
Mm-hmm. Well, did you always know that you were academically inclined? Like, even when you were, because I'm thinking when you were earlier in your life, you're in these appalling conditions, like in terms of the schools, where like you have all these grades together and
Well,
so
it's interesting because,
yeah,
you know, I had all these friends.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I should have been more perceptive. But when it came down to it, after I started going to university and came home to Ryan, you know, after about 2 minutes, what the hell do I talk to this guy about? You know, he's farming and it's a different world. And I frankly, as a kid, I realized I was very different from the great mass of the kids that I went to school with.
Mm-hmm.
There'd be the odd one and so on. But interest in ideas among the kids I went to school with was
Mm-hmm.
essentially zero, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
I guess maybe I could talk somewhat about my future career at that point.
Sure.
Not actually working in it, but heading that way. Mm-hmm. By my 3rd year of university, mm-hmm. I knew I wanted to be a teacher. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it just sort of popped up. I knew that was it. And so that's the direction I was heading in. But now what's my train of thought here? I guess it's how I headed from there. And maybe at this point, and this is something that I think is fundamental about oneself. You know, we know there are things about us that are called strengths, and there are things about us that are weaknesses. And particularly in the direction you're going in life, there are things that you just know you've got to change. If one thing I hadn't pointed out, as a teenager, I was frightened to death of speaking in public. Mm-hmm. I couldn't get up and get 2 words together, you know. And my God, well, I knew if you're going to be a teacher, you're just going to have to overcome that.
Yeah.
And so there, as I went, this of course is, I guess, jumps a period of time. You know, I went to Europe and so on, and spent a year. Spent 6 months traveling and and then coming back, and went into the university into the teachers. I had to have a year of teacher training, my 5th year of university. And one of the first times that I really felt I'd come over the hump, I was teaching in Creston, doing my teacher training, and I had to speak to 200-300 people, and I realized I could do it and do a significant job of it. You know, and it isn't just one hump. You know, you got to do that several times.
Yeah. So up until that point, were you just hoping that you'd pull it together?
I guess so. I was getting the classroom experience, of course, of teaching 30 kids and so on. But yeah, it's in many respects. I think it applies universally. That the things in the long run that you're proudest of are things that you fought to overcome. Things that you were very good at, you know, whether it's throwing a baseball, whatever, it didn't give you deep down pride. As those things that, my God, at one time I just couldn't handle it. Now I can. And it's so important. It's and you know, and to eventually strike out on an independent path that, you know, there are things in life that you're going to always be not so good at as maybe even the average person. But there are other things that you are very good at, and how you wheedle your way around that, and you know, get through life in a successful way. You know, make relationships. If I'd have got married at 22, oh my God, it'd have been a mess. So, you know, the things that you do over your life are vital, I think. And friends and so on you collect. In many respects, I'm a loner.
I think so, yeah.
I'm not someone that, you know, it showed up so much at the COVID thing here. Nana just about fell apart when she lost all her.
Oh, I didn't.
Pardon?
No, I didn't.
Your
I didn't
anxiety,
like it.
your anxiety was
Yeah, it was
at a
high.
very high level. She needs the constant social connection. Well, I don't. And so,
Although from your earlier stories, it sounded like you certainly welcomed it.
well, you gotta have a connection. That's, that I guess, we're talking level of association. No, you've got to, I would say even the so-called loner needs to have social connections that they keep up. And what you consider important and so on, perhaps sometimes changes during life. I'm non-monetarily
Motivated,
influenced.
yeah.
Here's a job, you can get $1 more a month than this job. So would you want to work there? I focused on what I wanted to do, and teaching just, fitted in so well for me. It's harder nowadays to do it because permanency isn't part of the job picture.
No, it's not.
So but in a way, Nana's parents totally did something very different in midlife,
Did they, yeah?
which is admirable as well. After I started teaching, I never looked back from it as a job. In those days, it was easy to get a job. I went to Medicine Hat and taught for 2 years. Then I decided to come back to the Lower Mainland. Applied for, I think, 5 jobs and got 5 jobs.
Yeah.
I took the Vancouver job then, and later on I switched to Delta. But yeah.
Nana said that you're a very popular teacher among the students.
Well, over my lifetime, I've done, I think, very well. And sometimes there were years when, maybe not years, but courses and so on, where if I was to look back on it, one of the faults that I have is taking on too many jobs. So there was a time in my 30s when I was just buried in work. And I was doing just too many things to do with the school and to do with the environmental organizations and to do with politics. I even ran, locally in Delta.
Yeah, I heard about that.
So I had this disease of not saying no, which left me not. There was a time when I wasn't doing things as well as I knew I should. These 2 books that we were writing, Manfred Schmidt and I were the editors, and then we got contributors. And what would happen in the grade 9 and the grade 10, there would be areas that I would basically supervise the structure of. as he would. And teachers would get credit for writing individual units.
Mm-hmm.
And Manford and I were the editors.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it got to a point, we did the grade 9. I'm listed as an editor, he and I. And then it got grade 10. And in those days, writing books was appallingly difficult.
Mm-hmm.
No computer.
Right.
So if you ever changed one page, page 10 in the book,
Mm-hmm.
you changed all of the goddamn pages. Can you imagine?
Yeah, I do find that hard
Oh.
to imagine. So you couldn't just swap out one page over.
It did. And now it just automatically changes.
Right, because you have to reformat all the text.
You have to reformat every goddamn.
Right. Yeah.
And it finally got partway through the grade 10 one. I phoned up Manford and said, I can't, I'm working in the environmental areas in Delta and so on, and I'm teaching this and that, and I can't continue. So I went off as editor.
Mm-hmm.
So in the second book, Manford's the only editor.
Mm-hmm.
Manford was an extraordinary fellow. Don't know if he's still alive or not. He's older than me, or was older.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I've always had that problem of taking on too much.
So maybe you could talk a bit about this work you're doing for the environment.
About what?
So this work you're doing for the environment, what was that intended?
We started out in Delta. We started an organization called Citadel,
Mm-hmm.
and this was in the 70s and so on, when we were pushing for maintenance of land areas in Delta, and working with various environmental groups and trying. I've been an environmentalist for over 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was sort of maybe 1968 or thereabouts
Mm-hmm.
when it struck me we're not heading in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never changed my mind for a moment. Things are happening now, but we're in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean all hell's going to fall apart. But we've got to do things in a far more consistent way with nature.
Mm-hmm.
Sustainability is such a vital term. And until we do it, and it has all kinds of avenues and directions that lead us to where we've got to be. We've become such a dominant species
Mm-hmm.
to the point it's to our own disadvantage, because I don't know an awful lot about biology,
Mm-hmm.
but one thing that's fundamental to me is diversity.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot live in a place where you're one species.
No.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, we're connected to ants, not only connected to
Yeah.
monkeys.
Yeah.
And it's really a deep concern to me that seemingly half of the human population believes that, you know, expanding the economy tomorrow and you know, doing more of what's already done too much of.
Mm-hmm.
Some people just don't want to believe that there are limits. When you look at the earth and, you know, when people first saw the earth as a planet out there,
Yeah. Yeah, that famous
Hey,
picture from the moon.
some of them with deep insight
Mhm.
thought, gee, look at it. It's all alone there.
Mhm.
And, you know, when we look at the parts of the earth, a part that we're so fundamentally dependent on, you know, this thin layer of vapor, you know, around the surface of the earth. It's really
It's
like
just skin deep. Yeah, if you look at the
it's
side
like
of
the
it.
paint on a gigantic object.
Mhm.
It's so subject to change, and we are changing it, and it's so obvious that we're changing it, and we're changing it in a way, unfortunately, that is not beneficial for us. So, I've had a number of students over the years, some who came to have totally different views on environmental change, on climate change. One of students that I got to know very well, he said, look at here. Carbon dioxide is 0.04% of the atmosphere.
Mhm.
And you're telling me what we're doing to that is dramatically changing us? I have to tell him yes. I know it's an extremely small part of the air, but what he has to realize is the immense or influence of the carbon atom and the water or molecule.
Mhm.
The carbon, you know, if we didn't have carbon, what would this seed out here look like?
It'd be a waste.
There wouldn't be a tree.
Yeah.
There wouldn't be a leaf. Well, it wouldn't be you and I.
Yeah. Mhm.
The for people not to accept the professional knowledge about what is happening in the environment
Mhm.
and how sensitive the environment is to temperature and so on.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, they've got historical records going back millions of years from the time when the Earth was an ice block.
Mhm.
That we just have got to realize that we have the capability of changing the world in a fashion we're going to have an awful time changing back. And So, as an old man, I'm not pleased with what my generation has done, to preserve the future. But at the same time, you can't go into pessimism. You've got to fight it,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually, I don't know how it's going to work out.
Well, no one does really.
I have these. It's interesting. I've had two of these sort of extraordinary dreams. The other night, I had a dream about Palestine.
Mm-hmm.
And all of the world leaders, Biden and Xi and all the others had got together, and they had forced a Middle East resolution to go with the 67 boundaries, which is now a sensible thing. Splits half of the Palestine for Palestinians and half for Israelis. There's about 7.1 million Israelis and 7.3 million Palestinians. And what could be done if all the world leaders got together and said, sorry, Netanyahu, we're just going to change things on you. For the longest time, for 100 years, Palestinians have been victims. 100 years. Taking their land away and so on. It's going nowhere for the Jews because, and it's interesting to think about, the most impressive force that the Palestinians have applied has happened in the bedrooms.
In the what? Sorry.
In the bedrooms.
Right. Just their sheer population.
They're producing children like they're going out of sight. 40% of Gazans are under 15.
It's interesting how that sort of pattern seems to repeat itself. Like you'd think that people in horrific conditions would be less likely to want children, but from what I've heard, that's replicable in many parts of the world where the poorest countries often have the highest.
It's not happening
there.
Yeah. And you hear the Jewish propaganda day in, day out. They want to drive us all into the sea. They want the last Jew to get forced out. Well, they want exactly the opposite. They want to drive the last Palestinian into the sea. And that's what they've been doing practically. Guess what? Boy, wouldn't they love to open the gates into Egypt and
push them out.
Empty Gaza of all its Palestinians. And then when it came time to come back, no. No, you're there now. That's what they want. And they've got an extremely impactful propaganda machine that's led Western people to believe that Jews are the victims in Palestine, and they aren't. Everybody knows Jews have been victims throughout the world for 1,000 years, but they aren't here. And it's a problem. And I feel if I had the power of, the authority to lay out a program for Palestine, solve that problem overnight. I mean, it's going to be extremely difficult. Jew here is going to have to move there, and a Palestinian here is going to have to move there, wherever. But you've got to create a livable situation for people.
Yeah, I think all idealists have those sorts of dreams.
Yeah, well,
Every
it's
once in
a,
while, right?
it's a dream,
Yeah.
all right.
Like I've
But
had the same in the past. as well.
It's only human ignorance and stubbornness that prevents them from happening. If the few leaders, if United States dropped or forced Israel into a two-state solution, they have to go there. It's the United States that's been
It's
propping them up.
Yeah.
And it's so nonsensical to believe that you can solve a problem for one people by moving them into the area where they have to push someone else out. It makes absolutely no sense.